Okay, hello everyone. After some time, I'm making a stream again on my YouTube channel. And today there was a live stream with Professor Shermer, Michael Shermer from Skeptics magazine, I think so. He's well known as an atheist and a skeptic. And I asked him this question to Professor Shermer: how can we explain our existence without a creator in face of the fact that the odds to have a minimal proteome by chance is 1 to 10 to the 722 thousandths of power? So I'll play the stream and I will comment it to what I think is pertinent to his answer and explanation.
Going toward questioning God question, as you put it in your lectures. How can we explain our existence without a creator? Or how can we prove or disprove a God? Is there a higher being? I don't know if we need to walk down the hall to the philosophy department for that question, but I have a feeling that you might have something to say on it.
Well, yes, we've done several issues of Skeptic. I've written a couple books on the topic. Let's see if I have those books in here. On the question of God's existence, and the interlocutor there, the correspondent, had a number. Chances of this happening by random chance or whatever was like 10 to the 722,000, more than the atoms are in the universe or whatever. Yes, if the laws of nature, and particularly those of evolutionary theory, like natural selection, were just random, we wouldn't be here. And no one is saying that that's how it works.
Okay, so we will see that soon he starts to talk about evolution. And it's interesting that he confirms and admits that if it would be random, then we wouldn't be here. Now, the thing is that it is actually either randomness or an intelligent creator. There is no evolution to explain the origin of life, and that was precisely the question which I was asking, because the first proteome is related to the minimal number of proteins which are required to emerge prebiotically to actually start life. And we don't have an explanation by evolution in regards of that issue. Evolution isn't a mechanism to explain the origin of life. And he simply starts off, as we will see, talking about evolution and how it explains that number. Let's keep watching.
That's the problem. Evolution is not random. You have randomness in terms of genetic variation and mutations and so on, but it's the non-random cumulative selection.
Yeah. So I see this many times, that atheists, they try to smuggle in evolution into the origin of life and to explain the origin of life. And of course, that is simply not a warranted explanation, because evolution doesn't play there. Unless there is DNA replication, there cannot be evolution. So it is really either one or the other. Either it is random chance or it is design. There is no evolution at this stage.
Part of the evolutionary formula that counts. Richard Dawkins famously defined natural selection as this random variation plus non-random cumulative selection. So this is the non-random part that creates design and functionality and complexity in living organisms. So like the eye was designed to see, wings are designed to fly, thumbs are designed to grasp things. The design word was there long before Darwin, and design arguments were made long before Darwin, including famously by Paley, the watchmaker argument, that Darwin well knew. He had that book, Paley's book, down about the watchmaker design argument in his head so well, he said he practically had it memorized. But he gave us a scientific explanation of how nature creates design.
Well, it wasn't actually a scientific explanation. It was a philosophical, hypothetical explanation. Darwin, of course, 150 years ago, didn't have any understanding whatsoever in regards what the mechanisms are on a molecular or a biochemical level, which define organismal complexity, and so as well in regards what is required to have life starting.
By functionality. And it happens from the bottom up gradually. And so things look designed because they are designed, but they're designed by natural selection from the bottom up, not from the top down by an intelligent designer. So, and you can take that all the way back to chemical evolution and the beginnings of life. Now,
wow, did you hear that? You can take that back to chemical evolution and to the origin of life. No, you can't. That is simply not true, Dr. Shermer. That is a false assertion. There was no evolution at this stage. Evolution doesn't act on molecules. DNA replication is required. There are several things which are required. We can have a look on that, and then we will continue. Let me put that here on the screen. Okay, here we go. Darwin persuades us that the seemingly purposeful construction of living things can very often and perhaps always be attributed to the operation of natural selection. Natural selection requires three processes: reproduction, variation, and inheritance. If you have things that are reproducing their kind, if there are sometimes random variations nevertheless in the offspring, if such variations can be inherited, if some such variations can sometimes confer an advantage of their owners, if there is competition between the reproducing entities, if there is an overproduction so that not all will be able to survive to produce offspring themselves, then these entities will get better at reproducing their kind. What is needed for natural selection are things that conform to those ifs. Self-replicating cells are prerequisites for evolution. None of this was available prebiotically to explain the origin of the first life forms.
by functionality. And it happens from the bottom up gradually. And so things look designed because they are designed, but they're designed by natural selection from the bottom up, not from the top down by an intelligent designer. So, and you can take that all the way back to chemical evolution and the beginnings of life. Now, the correspondence probably it would probably counter with something like, okay, well, what's the consensus on the accepted theory of the origins of life? There is none yet. We have half a dozen to a dozen different theories of how life began, and it's a hard problem. And
it's a hard problem, Dr. Shermer, and there is not just a half dozen, but I have catalogized over 45 different hypotheses, and none of them actually works.
We're still working on it. And perhaps if we discover life on other planets, like microbial life on Mars, say, or one of the moons of Jupiter or Saturn, that would be a pretty interesting test case to see if they have something like DNA or RNA. DNA, and a self-replicating molecule is what we're getting at. Something.
Yeah, the fact is that to have a life hosting planet, there are the odds are 1 to 10 to the 140th power. There are so many things which have to be just right. Planet Earth is precisely fine-tuned to host life. So you won't find easily life on Mars or Jupiter or whatever planet or exoplanet that you like. That won't gonna happen so easily as you speculate.
Thing that can cause the information in the organisms to repeat and continue on, and even build more complex systems through an increase in information. Whatever the mechanism of that would be, would give us a lot of information about it, but we don't have that yet. So we don't have that. And what makes you believe that someday we will have that mechanism? There is no reason to believe that this will be the case somewhere in the future. So to counter to that argument, I would just say, well, you can't just say, well, God did it, because that's not an argument. We call that the God of the gaps argument.
Oh, so now comes the God of the gaps argument. Why is that not an argument, Dr. Shermer? Just because you don't like it? Because you think it's not your preferred explanation? I mean, it is in as much a possible explanation as natural unguided mechanisms. So it is not the God of the gaps argument. We have good reasons to believe that the information stored in DNA requires an intelligent designer, and that is a positive argument. It is based on positive evidence where we know that instructional assembly information which directs the making of machines comes always from intelligence. And that is a positive argument. It is not based on a gap of knowledge. It is based on what we do know, actually, what works. So this is a really simplistic and flawed rebuttal.
Argument. Whatever you guys can't explain something, that's where we think God stepped in to stir the particles to create this or that, the wing, the eye, DNA, whatever. And that's not a philosophically sound or even satisfying explanation, because it's not an explanation at all. It's just saying, and then a miracle happens. Boom, there it is. Okay. Now to the bigger question, God's existence. At some point, we hit an epistemological wall where neither myself or the theologian, the theist, can say, well, what caused it all in the very beginning? So to the theist who says, well, there has to be a first cause, a prime mover, something had to give rise to cause the Big Bang to bang in the first place, so there had to be something. Well, and that something is called God. Well, why can't I just take that one step further back the causal chain and say, well, where did God come from? Now,
well, God doesn't come from somewhere. God is just the necessary fundamental being which has to exist eternally and which instantiated everything else and everything which was created through him. So you cannot have an infinite chain of events back in the past, because otherwise we would never come to exist and be in the now. So that isn't an explanation.
They'll answer something like, well, God is that which does not need to be created, just existence in all eternity. Okay, if that's possible, then why can't the universe be something that exists eternally?
Yeah, the universe cannot exist eternally. And I am surprised, Dr. Shermer, that you actually asked that question you are a person which is well educated in all these issues, in all these questions, and I mean, by now you don't have an answer to that question. I mean, there are so many different lines of reasoning which point to the fact that the universe cannot be eternal. One is the second law of thermodynamics. The other one is the background radiation, that the universe is expanding. And then there is the fact that we cannot have an infinite series of events in the past. So all these reasons provide us a good foundation to actually deny that possibility that the universe is eternal. So that shouldn't be actually a question at all.
And well, there was a Big Bang, so it was the beginning of the universe. I don't mean our universe. There might be multiple universes. There might be a series of Big Bangs, bubble universes that expand and contract.
Wow. So you're resorting now to the multiverse. Well, that's not new either. And that is just a made-up explanation where there is absolutely no evidence, and you are just pushing back the question of an absolute beginning a step further away, but it doesn't go away. It doesn't explain why there is a universe rather than nothing, and also why there are physical laws and why there is fine-tuning. So this is a very weak line of argumentation, Dr. Shermer. I'm surprised that you bring up all these baseless claims.
Or there might be a bunch of different bubble universes, the multiverse, and they begin in the quantum foam or inside of black holes, or who knows? We don't know yet. But to invoke a deity as the causal explanation is unsatisfying because it's not really an explanation. It's just saying, and then another miracle happened, except this was the biggest miracle of all. So at some point, here's what I personally think about this: if at some point you either make the leap of faith or you don't. How satisfied are you personally for your cognitive style and your emotional needs to say, I think there is a God, or I don't think there is a God?
Yeah. So you are basically sticking to multiverses, to chemical evolution, to all these things where there is absolutely no evidence for. And you have to, in my understanding, you have to take a much bigger leap of faith to believe that these things are actually even possible rather than not. I mean, I started with my question at the beginning. Do you think it is reasonable to believe that an initial proteome with about 1,300 proteins could emerge randomly? And I mean, you come up with evolution, with chemical evolution. It takes a huge leap of faith to actually believe that this is possible. And I don't think it is rational at all.
I think that really is what it comes down to. Not just how you were raised. There's plenty of examples of people that were raised religious and became atheists or vice versa, although that's a factor. Culture's a factor. Family's a factor. But more importantly, you personally and your cognitive style and your instincts and intuitions and emotions, how comfortable are you with just saying, I don't know, nobody knows, versus I think I need an answer, and that answer is God?
Nice. So this is another one which is very common to say, oh, we don't know yet, but science is working on it. Science will find out, and so forth. So this is another very common talking point to just resort to agnosticism. It cannot be God, but we don't know what alternative explanation would be sound and reasonable.
Now, the theists, they have good arguments, the fine-tuning, the first cause, the cosmological argument. And we have good counter-arguments to all those, starting with...
No. You even admitted that you have no good arguments, Dr. Shermer. You said we don't know, you said multiverse, you said chemical evolution, you said evolution. How is this a good argument whatsoever? It's not.
With David Hume. And so you can go down that rabbit hole of reading the argument, counter argument, and so on. But at some point you just go, you know what? I just think it's true. There is a God, or no, I'm just not buying it. And that, I think, it ends up being something like an emotional leap that you make or don't.
No, I think that your denial of God is actually an emotional leap. It can only be grounded on emotional reasons, because somehow for some reason you don't want there to be a God. But our position is actually based on sound scientific evidence, which leads to a creator at the bottom of reality, which is necessary to instantiate everything else. And that is based on sound evidence in the natural world and direct revelation through the Bible.
Interesting.
So you think that the column fails at the gate? Well, I don't think so. If you want to come in and bring your point, yeah, the link is above there. Otherwise, I will soon stop the stream here.
I in particular, I am a fan of some of the skeptical podcasts that have touched on this subject. Skeptics with a K, and our own Stephen Novella, one of your co-professors, Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, the Skeptocrat, all of those good ones, and they discuss this God in the gaps concept, and trying to suss out the logic of all of it. I guess personally, that's something that when brought up to family members, it's like, well, that's what's called faith. Okay. Though I would argue, for me at least, I don't understand quantum physics. That is just not how my brain is wired, but I understand there is proof for it. Versus, I don't need to have faith for something like that. How does one be a good skeptic? Like, are there traits that, or are there skills that someone that wants to be a good skeptic should be practicing?
Okay. Okay, so basically that was the reason I opened the stream here, to address Dr. Shermer's argument. And as a closing remark, I am surprised by the very standard answers that he has given in his reply to my question. Very shallow, very superficial, typical, claiming God of the gaps, claiming we don't know yet, science is working on it, science will find out, multiverses, evolution, chemical evolution. So these are the very typical talking points which are being mentioned very frequently, and I think none of them actually do withstand scrutiny. So that's it. See you next time. Bye, guys.